Okay students, now we will discuss the grammatical structures which are being used in the same text that we explained. I have selected some phrases, some sentences, some grammatical units inside the text, and we will explain it. Please be attentive because these are a bit complicated. I want these grammatical structures practically. We are not supposed to define anything because for the last 10 or 12 years we are doing the same thing, that noun is the person, place, thing, etc. But we don't know about it practically. Whenever we study any text, we don't know what types of structures or grammatical structures are being used or have been used inside the text. So we are doing and we are selecting some sentences and words from the same text that we discussed today. Now you see, we have sentence like, you know really that not only we ourselves are wandering. Now you see, the rest of the sentence are there in your text. So you should look up in your text. You know really. Now you see, this really tells us about know. So any word which tells us about verb, we call it an adverb. So really is an adverb. Now the next we have the second clause starts from here. You know really, this is one clause. The next clause starts from that not only we ourselves are wandering, and so on. This is one clause and this is second clause. Now this second clause works as a noun. For example, we have a sentence, you know him really. You know Ali. You know Ali. If we remove this adverb really, so then we would have a noun. You know him. You know Ali. So in place of Ali or you know him, in place of pronoun him, we use this clause. So this is a noun clause. This is a noun clause which starts with a conjunction that. That is working as a conjunction over here. It works as a subordinate conjunction. So the clause which starts from this word that, from the conjunction that, we call it a noun clause because it works as a noun or it works as a pronoun. So any clause which works as a noun or pronoun, we call it a noun clause. Now the next word we have cyclonic revolution, which has brought about the plane of. Now you see the next of the sentence are there in your text. Cyclonic revolution. First of all, cyclonic tells us about revolution. So cyclonic is an adjective because it tells us about the noun revolution, which tells us about or which replace this revolution, which is a relative pronoun. It is a relative pronoun which is basically used for non-living things, for an idea, not for a living thing. So which replace or it relates, it describes this word noun, and noun is the revolution. So any word which relates, which describes, which replaces a noun, we call it a relative pronoun. We call it a relative pronoun. So this which is relative pronoun because it relates, ये बयान करता है, it describes a noun which has been discussed before, and this noun is known as antecedent. We call it a antecedent. So this is relative pronoun, and this clause which starts from relative pronoun, which we call it subordinate clause. This noun clause is also subordinate clause because it starts with a subordinate conjunction that. This clause, this is noun clause, and this is what we call adjective clause. We call it relative clause, adjective clause. Relative clause or adjective clause starts from what? From subordinate conjunction which, but which is also a relative pronoun. It is also a relative pronoun which was a subordinate conjunction in this clause. Now you see, we have the next about the plane, about, brought about the plane, brought about, you see, which brought about, which took place, which ensured, which caused. So brought is a verb, about is what we call a preposition. But remember, here it was as what? As a phrasal verb. Now, when verb is followed by a preposition, like here we have about, bring about. So this is prepositional verb. We call it prepositional verb. But if it gives a different meaning from its literal meaning, so then this about is working as an adverb. So it becomes a phrasal verb. In phrasal verb, I have told you earlier that in phrasal verb, the preposition which follows that verb, that preposition works as an adverb. So here this about is working as an adverb. Now if we take it separately, so about the plane, then it is a preposition. About is a preposition and plane is a noun. So any phrase which starts with a preposition and ends with a noun, we call it prepositional phrase. But separately, brought about is basically a phrasal verb. And here about is working as an adverb, not as a preposition. The next we have, there is no parallel in the history. There is no, now you see, this there is working, basically there is an adverb of a place. There is working as adverb. For example, I say, I saw him there, waha. So waha tells us about place. So there is basically adverb of place. But here you see, when we say there are many rooms, there are many chairs, and there is no parallel in the history, so there gives no meaning. Remember, here in this phrase or in this sentence, there gives no meaning. It replaces this, means no parallel in history. This there is basically working as a dummy subject, because it replaces a subject. And it works as a pronoun over here. This there is basically works as a pronoun in this sentence. There are many rooms. Now so you see, many rooms is basically the subject, but there has replaced that many rooms. So there is working as a dummy subject. We call it dummy subject. So here there is working as a pronoun. The next we have in the history. Now you see, in is preposition and history is noun. So this is prepositional phrase, a combination of words. It might be 2 or 3 having no complete meaning. We call it phrase, and this phrase starts with a preposition in and ends with a noun, so we call it prepositional phrase. The next sentence we have, and what is more important with regards to it. And what is more important? Now you see, and is a coordinate conjunction. And is a coordinate conjunction. We have 7 coordinate conjunction. Okay, we call it fan voice. In fan voice we have 4, and neither, B for but, O for or, and Y for yet, and S for so. So we have 7 coordinate conjunction, and is also coordinate conjunction. And what is more important with regards to, we have a phrase with regards to. Now you see, this phrase is followed by it pronoun. It pronoun. This with regards to is a phrase, but it works as a preposition. It works as a preposition because it comes before pronoun. It comes before pronoun or a noun. So this works as a preposition. With regards to is basically phrase preposition. It is in the shape of phrase. It is in the guise of phrase. So it is a phrase and it works as a preposition, so we call it phrase preposition. So with regards to is a phrase preposition, it also sometimes works as a conjunction. Sometimes it works as a conjunction as well. Now we have by means of an evolution. By means of. We have the next phrase, by means of an evolution. By means of is also a phrase preposition. As a phrase preposition, in phrase preposition you would have more than one word. It might be 2 or 3. For example, we say according to. So according to is also a phrase preposition. It is a combination of 2 words, according and a preposition to, according to. The next we have in accordance with. In accordance with, in accordance with. It is also a phrase preposition. So there are many preposition which comes in a phrase, so we call it phrase preposition. So by means of an evolution, now you see this is preposition by means of, it is a phrase preposition and it ends with a noun evolution. So combinedly it is a prepositional phrase which starts by means of and ends with a noun evolution. So we call it a prepositional phrase. Then we have dealing with our first function in this assembly. I cannot make a pronouncement. This was a sentence which we also explained while we were explaining and reading the text. So we have taken this sentence from the same text. Dealing with our first function, these are the words which were delivered by Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So dealing with our first function in this assembly, dealing is in itself, it is a participle. Combinedly we call it participle phrase, because participle phrase we can also read it in the same way that while dealing, this whole phrase describe or modified this clause, I cannot make a pronouncement. This is a main clause. This is the clause. We also call it adverbial. Adverbial, that part of sentence or that part which is an additional part, which adds something more with the main clause, with the main sentence. The main sentence starts with I cannot make a pronouncement. But this whole phrase, this participle phrase tells us about this main clause. It describes, it modifies a main clause. So we call it participle phrase. Participle, previously I have told you that we plus ing, when it works as a verb, we call it present participle. Verb plus ing, when works as a verb, we call it, for example, we say I am dealing in class. So I am dealing. So dealing is working as a verb. So we call it present participle as well. So present participle works as a verb as well. But it also works as an adjective. For example, we say smiling girl. Smiling tells us about girl. So girl is noun and smiling is present participle which works as an adjective. Clear now? So this whole clause or phrase, it modifies this main clause. I cannot make a pronouncement. This is main clause. So it modifies this main clause. We call it participle phrase, because participle, as I told you, participle is also work as an adjective, and it modifies a noun. It modifies a pronoun. It modifies the main clause as well. Like you see here, it modifies the main clause. I cannot make pronouncement. Then we have the first observation. Now you see first. First tells us about observation. Observation is noun and first is an adjective of number. First is adjective of number. For example, we have one observation. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 is also adjective or also adjective of a number. And first, second, third is also working as an adjective of number. But 1, 2, 3 are known as 1, 2, 3 are known as what? They are known as cardinal numbers. We call it cardinal numbers. And first, second, third is known as ordinal numbers. Ordinal numbers. But these both cardinal numbers and ordinal numbers both are working as an adjective of number. Adjective of a number. So first, the first observation. So first is adjective, observation is noun. That I would like to make. Now you see, that once again describe, it relates this observation. It tells us about this observation. That I would like to make. This whole clause tells us about this observation. Clear now? This is a relative clause because once again relate means sunana. It describes this noun observation, this observation noun also known as antecedent. And this antecedent is described by this clause. This clause is known as relative clause. Relative clause, and this that here it was as a subordinate conjunction and it also was as a relative pronoun. Previously we have discussed it. Now you see this which is also this a relative clause and which is a relative pronoun. In the same way this that is also a relative pronoun. This that is also working as a subordinate conjunction and which is also working as a subordinate conjunction. But basically these two words which and that are working as a relative pronoun. So this is a relative clause, that is a relative conjunction. The next we have to make. Once again in the same clause we have the phrase to make. To plus verb. To plus verb is working as an infinitive. An infinitive is a noun. It is a noun. To plus verb makes an infinitive. An infinitive is a noun, it is not a verb. It is also known as verbal noun because it is made of a verb. So we call it verbal noun and we also call it an infinitive. So to plus verb, to write, to speak, to play, we call it an infinitive which works as a noun. Or condition is much worse. Now you see worse is basically adjective. And much tells us about the word worse, adjective. So this much is an adverb. Any word which tells us about adjective, we call it an adverb. So much is adverb of a degree. We call it adverb of degree. Okay, then we have our condition is much worse. We have then dash. Our condition is much worse, which is followed by this is a dash. Now you see dash. Dash is basically a punctuation. Punctuation refers to those marks which are being put inside a passage according to its meaning. So we have one single dash. We put single dash when we are going to bring a sudden change. Bring a sudden change. The first sentence or the first clause is quite different from the clause which precedes this dash. So single dash for sudden change and double dash for making explanation of the previous statement. Double dash is also works as a parenthesis, brackets. We can use double dash in place of what? Parenthesis sometime. In place of small brackets. So this is punctuation. The next we have as soon as it is possible. As soon as. Now you see it is possible. It is possible is a clause. It is subject, is possible is predicate, combinedly we call it clause. But it is preceded by a conjunction. As soon as, it is basically a subordinate conjunction, though it is in a phrase form. Conjunction mostly are words. But sometimes you see we might have a phrase which works as a conjunction. So as soon as, this is a conjunction and it is followed by a clause. We call it subordinate clause because as soon as is a subordinate conjunction. So any clause which follows this subordinate conjunction, we call it a subordinate clause. It is quite simple. So I hope that you have understood these grammatical structures, explanation of these few paragraphs, sketch of the lesson, and the objectives that we have to attain at the completion of the same lesson. I hope that you are doing well. Thank you and have a nice day ahead.